They sold every daughter in town like cattle at market. When the search party finally reached what was left of them, they found only one girl alive, bald, broken, and heavy with a child whose father would never have a name. Magnolia Voss woke into a silence that didn't belong. Not the soft hush of morning peace, but the sharp, bone-deep quiet that crawls up the spine and whispers that something is wrong. The boarding house, usually alive with the laughter and footsteps of 6 young women, felt like a crypt. She called their names as she moved through the house, her voice growing more frantic with each unanswered echo. Willa, Clarice, Bonnie, Nell, Ivy, Tessa. Nothing, only the creak of wood and the cold draft drifting in from the front door, which stood half open, swaying gently in the breeze. A line of bootprints scarred the dusty floor. Not just a few, but dozens too many for a friendly visit, too many for anything good. Struggle marked the scuffed planks, scratches on the threshold, a broken lamp by the stairs. Her girls were gone. Magnolia had taken those girls in when no one else would. Orphans, strays, cast-offs, young women who had no place in a town like Copper Ridge, where virtue was measured in marriage proposals and silence. She gave them shelter, shores, food, and something more rare than safety, dignity. And now, someone had stripped it from them in the dark. She stormed into the sheriff's office like a wildfire. But Porter Dale barely blinked from behind his morning coffee. A lazy man with weak eyes and a weaker spine. He muttered something about wild girls and runaways, but Magnolia knew better. These weren't girls who fled, they were girls who had finally, painfully, found something like home. Word spread like brush fire through Copper Ridge's sun-bleached streets. Other families began checking. Soon, it was clear the tragedy wasn't hers alone. 3 girls missing from the north side, 2 more from the merchant district. By midday, 9 young women had vanished as though swallowed by the wind. A crowd formed in the town square, fathers, brothers, uncles, some armed, all angry. One man swore he'd seen a procession of strangers the night before, well-dressed men in polished boots with velvet-lined carriages, headed east toward the Badlands. Another remembered hearing wheels clattering over cobblestone long after midnight. Clyde Rafferty arrived among the murmuring crowd, his gray mustache twitching like a predator's whiskers. He wore concern like a freshly pressed coat and pledged funds for a search party. Claimed his niece was among the stolen. His offer was generous, even noble. But Magnolia felt something tighten inside her chest when he spoke. Something slick, behind the eyes, like a man used to watching people lose. Within hours, 20 men rode out on horseback, armed and grim. They followed the wagon tracks across sagebrush and over rock-strewn hills, into lands where law gave way to dust and buzzards. On the 3rd day, they found torn cloth snagged on thorn scraps of dresses Magnolia recognized with a mother's certainty. A piece of Clarice's favorite blue cotton, now faded and stained with rust-colored smears. Then the trail split. Wagons had peeled off in different directions, north, south, east, deliberately scattered, as if the cargo had been dispersed to make it harder to follow. But one narrow canyon offered signs of a recent encampment. Empty tents, cold fire pits, a few bloodied blankets, nothing alive, except for one building, a crude wooden hut that stank of sweat and fear. Inside, they found Willa Glenn, or what was left of her. Gone were her golden curls, shaved down to the scalp, leaving angry welts where the blade had skipped. Her dress hung in tatters, her skin bruised and gray. She clutched her swollen belly with both hands as though it was the only thing tethering her to the earth. Her lips moved, but no sound came. That it was the ledger that turned men's stomachs. Hidden beneath a warped floorboard, the book recorded sales with mechanical precision, names, prices, destinations. The handwriting was neat, like someone had taken pride in their cruelty. Every girl from Copper Ridge was listed, and beside Willa's name, a single word scrawled in red ink, return. She didn't speak that day, not to the doctor, not to the men, not even to Magnolia. She sat motionless, rocking gently, her hands curled around her stomach. The girl who once sang lullabies in the kitchen now flinched when someone stepped too close. The men demanded answers. They thundered and paced, fists clenched, voices raised. But Willa gave them nothing, only silence and tremors. Magnolia sent the search party back to town. If Willa had answers, they wouldn't come through force or fury. Healing required gentleness, patience, and in Copper Ridge, patience was growing scarce. By the time the men returned, the mood had turned poisonous. Suspicion hung like dust in the air. Some townsfolk began whispering that the girls had invited trouble. Others muttered about punishment and wrath, as if God had turned his back on them. The fragile unity that had held during the search fractured. Beneath grief and blame, through it all, Clyde Rafferty stayed visible, organizing vigils, offering money, patting backs, but he never once asked how Willa was faring, never once looked concerned about what she might remember. On the third night, her voice returned, barely more than a breath. "They're gone." "Who, honey?" Magnolia asked softly, brushing sweat from Willa's brow. "The others," Willa whispered. Tears fell freely. "They're all gone. Sold." The story bled out slowly, torn and fragmented. Wealthy men had arrived late in the night. They drugged the girls' evening stew with something foul and paralyzing, conscious, but unable to move. They'd been loaded into wagons and taken east to what Willa could only describe as a market for monsters, a place where girls were dolled up in white gowns and paraded like livestock, sold to bidders from far-off places. Clarice had been sent to California, Bonnie to Mexico. The others' names Willa could barely say vanished into a darkness without borders. "Why did they bring you back?" Magnolia asked, though her heart already knew. Willa laid her hand on her belly. "Because of this, no one wanted damaged goods." The words hit like a slap. Not only had they stolen the girls, they'd rejected one for carrying life. As punishment, they shaved her, humiliated her, and cast her aside like trash. But there was something else, a detail Willa couldn't forget. The auctioneer, a man with jagged scars across his hands, and a gold tooth that glinted in the lantern. Light had spoken about future shipments from Copper Ridge. As if this wasn't the first time, Magnolia's blood turned to ice. This wasn't a what-time horror. It was a business, a system. Someone in their town had been feeding these monsters names, addresses, vulnerabilities. Someone who knew who'd be missed, and who wouldn't. She could no longer trust the sheriff, not after his indifference. She would have to act on her own. Quietly, Magnolia began watching, listening. She studied the people of Copper Ridge with new eyes. Who had coins they shouldn't? Who asked too much about the missing? Who looked away when Willa's name came up? Old Martha Whitmore pulled her aside behind the general store, her hands trembling. "I should have spoken sooner," she whispered. "Strange men have been passing through for weeks, always asking about young ladies, always paying in gold." She'd seen them talking to locals, including Clyde Rafferty. But it was the questions they asked that curdled Magnolia's stomach. Which girls had family? Which ones didn't? Did the girls at Magnolia's house have anywhere else to go? The cruelty was methodical. They had targeted the unwanted, the invisible. When Magnolia returned home, Willa was upright, pale but thinking. "There's something else," she said. "The man with the gold tooth." He called someone his partner, said their arrangement in Copper Ridge was working perfectly. They were planning to expand. "Did you recognize the voice?" Willa hesitated, brow furrowed. "Yes, but I don't know from where." "Someone local." Later that night, Clyde Rafferty came calling, soup in hand, concern dripping from his voice. He asked how Willa was recovering, but the questions kept circling back. What had she heard? What had she seen? Did she remember faces? When Willa mentioned the gold tooth, Rafferty's jaw tightened just slightly. When she spoke of recognizing the partner's voice, his fingers tapped once on his knee, then stilled. "Poor child," he murmured. "Trauma can confuse the mind. You might think you heard something that wasn't there." When he left, Willa gripped Magnolia's wrist, her eyes wide. "It's him," she breathed. "That's the voice I heard. Mr. Rafferty." The truth fell into place like shattered glass. Clyde Rafferty, so generous, so involved, had orchestrated this nightmare from the inside. His sudden wealth, his strange curiosity about the girls, his influence. He'd built trust while marking daughters like cattle. But Magnolia couldn't accuse him yet. Not without proof. If he suspected anything, he'd vanish and more girls would vanish with him. She leaned close to Willa. "Did They say when the next shipment would happen. Willa closed her eyes. When the moon turns dark again, easier to move at night. 5 days. The new moon was 5 days away. Somewhere in Copper Ridge, other girls were already being watched, already marked. That night, Magnolia crept to Rafferty's estate. His house loomed like a monument to stolen innocence. All the windows were dark except one. His study, a faint, flickering light glowed behind drawn curtains. She moved carefully through the shadows, circling the house until she found a window left slightly ajar, a narrow slit in the drapes, just enough to see in, and just maybe, enough to catch a devil at work. What Magnolia saw through the narrow break in the curtain made her stomach churn. Clyde Rafferty sat hunched over his desk, not amidst account ledgers or land deeds as one might expect from a man of his standing, but something far more sinister: papers, covered with painstakingly detailed information about nearly every family in town, names, ages, physical descriptions of daughters, notations in tidy script cataloged which homes had side doors or broken latches, which bedrooms had windows that could be forced from the outside. There were rough sketches of houses, arrows drawn to indicate entrance points, and escape routes marked like a general planning and invasion dot behind him. An enormous map spanned the wall, a spider's web of pins and ink, dozens of towns marked in red, each one labeled with numbers, some crossed out, others underlined. Copper Ridge wasn't his first hunting ground. It wasn't even in the top 10. She watched as he flipped a page in the black leather ledger, methodically updating details about his newest targets. Her heart stopped when she realized what he was doing. He was preparing for another abduction. 6 more girls, 6 more families, would wake to empty beds, broken hearts, and a silence that never healed. She leaned closer, and then her blood ran cold. Some of the names on the list weren't just familiar. They were sacred, daughters of the very men who had ridden into the wilderness to bring the others home. The girls of those who had stood beside her, raised voices in the town square, offered horses, weapons, hands. Rafferty was punishing them for caring, for daring to fight back. Then she saw it. Emma Dale, 16, sheriff's daughter, lives alone. With father, even Porter Dale's apathy, his weakness, wouldn't shield his only child from the greedy reach of Rafferty's hand. He wasn't sparing allies or enemies. He was turning loyalty into a liability. Magnolia pressed her hand against the wooden frame, struggling to breathe. Rafferty reached beneath his desk and pulled out a small leather pouch, its mouth opening with the dull clink of gold coins. He counted them slowly, stacking each one with precise fingers, like a man savoring the ritual. Payment for services rendered, or perhaps a down payment for girls not yet taken. Each coin glittered like a sin, each one soaked in the price of a girl's body and soul. Then, a sharp groan betrayed her one floorboard, too much weight. Rafferty's head snapped up. Their eyes met through the window in one terrible instant. For a heartbeat, he looked stunned. Then something darker moved across his face. Calculation, certainty. He smiled, not with fear, but with the slow, confident curl of a man who believed himself untouchable. He lifted a single finger to his lips, the gesture obscene in its intimacy. Then he pointed to the front door. The message was unmistakable. He wanted to talk. Every instinct in Magnolia screamed for her to run, to flee, gather Willa, and vanish from Copper Ridge before the whole twisted machine came crashing down around them. But if she ran, if she disappeared, Rafferty would continue. Other girls would be taken. Other mothers would bury dreams instead of daughters. She had 5 days until the new moon. 5 days to stop a predator and save 6 innocent girls. But before she could act, she had to survive whatever game he was about to play. She didn't wait for him to come to her. Magnolia strode straight to his door and knocked, her knuckles firm, her hands steady despite the dread winding around her ribs like a vice. The door opened with a low groan. Rafferty stood there in the golden lamplight, the same sick smile on his face. "Magnolia," he said, as if greeting an old friend, "I wondered when you'd pay me a visit." He stepped aside, gesturing with mock courtesy. The house smelled of old wood, expensive tobacco, and something bitter underneath, like dried blood behind polished floors. Magnolia stepped inside. He offered her a drink, pouring whiskey into cut glass tumblers. "I don't drink with men who sell children," she said, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. He laughed. It was a hollow sound, direct. "I've always admired that in a woman. Saves time on pleasantries." He sank into his leather armchair, swirling the amber liquid, watching her like a man watching a snake in a glass box. "You know, I've long respected your little operation, taking in strays, giving them something to do. You and I were not that different. We're nothing alike. You collect girls no one else wants. I find them homes where they're appreciated." He shrugged. "The difference is profit margins." Magnolia's stomach turned. The casual cruelty in his tone was nauseating. "They trusted me," she said. "I gave them shelter, safety. You turned them into product. Do you know what Clarice sold for?" He said, smiling wider. $300, more than. She'd make in 5 years scrubbing floors at your boarding house, in their new homes. They'll eat better than most of the poor wretches in Copper Ridge. Silk sheets, polished floors, warm meals. Isn't that what you wanted for them?" She wanted to claw the smirk from his face, but she stayed still. Every word was another thread in the noose she would tie around his neck. "Here's what's going to happen," Rafferty said smoothly, setting his glass down. "You're going to take Willa and leave town. Tonight, you'll disappear, stay quiet, and in return, I'll cross the other girls off my list. No harm done. And if I refuse," his smile didn't falter, "then Willow will suffer an unfortunate accident. Pregnant girls are delicate, especially ones under stress, and the 6 others, they'll still disappear, but their journey will be considerably less pleasant." The threat sank in like a rusted blade. He had orchestrated every detail, prepared every escape route, and now he was offering her a devil's bargain. Save a few, sacrifice the rest, trade silence for survival. "I need time to think. You have until sunset tomorrow," he said casually. "After that, my associates might consider you inconvenient." Magnolia turned to go, her feet heavy, her mind whirling with fire. "Oh, and Magnolia," he added behind her, almost as an afterthought, "that baby Will is carrying it. Belongs to my partner, the one with the gold tooth. He's got preferences. When girls fight back, nature takes its course." Her breath caught. Not just rape, not just abduction. The pregnancy was a product of planned, repeated violation. Willa had carried more than a burden. She'd carried the mark of monsters. Magnolia stepped out into the night air, the cold biting into her lungs like punishment. The sky above seemed darker than before, even with the stars blazing. Rafferty believed he'd won, that she'd crumble beneath the weight of his threats. He had made one fatal miscalculation. He'd underestimated a woman who would burn down heaven and hell to protect her daughters. When she returned, Willa was sitting at the window, one hand cradling her belly, the other clutching the edge of the curtain as if the world outside might vanish at any second. "He came while you were gone," Willa said softly. "Not Rafferty. The other one. Tall man, scars on his hands, gold tooth, magnolias." Spine stiffened. "What did he say?" "That girls who remember too much often have accidents." Willa's voice trembled, but her eyes held something stronger. "That babies can come early when mothers are under too much stress." She paused. "But I heard something else. He didn't mean for me to hear it." Willa had played the part, cowering, whimpering, pretending to be more broken than she was, through the thin wooden walls. She had listened. The man had spoken to someone outside logistics, plans, timing. "They're not waiting for the new moon," she said. "They're moving tomorrow night, taking the girls and leaving Copper Ridge for good." The clock was broken. The hourglass had shattered. Magnolia didn't have 5 days. She had 1. They're meeting at the old mining camp, north of town. The silver camp no one talks about anymore. "There's more," Willa added, her voice dropping. "He said they'd tie up loose ends before they go. I think they mean to kill us, Miss Magnolia." Magnolia felt the shape of the plan harden into clarity. Rafferty was preparing to vanish, erasing all evidence, all witnesses, wipe Copper Ridge clean, and start fresh somewhere else. By the time anyone realized the truth, he would be gone. Another name, another town, another board full of pins. She couldn't run. She wouldn't. Not while other girls still had a chance. If Clyde Rafferty wanted a war, Magnolia Voss would give him one. But first, she needed allies. She rode straight to Sheriff Dale's house, the lantern on his porch barely flickering. He was seated in silence, a bottle at his side, his eyes glazed. A man who had spent too long pretending everything was fine. "Your daughter," she said. "She's on the list." It was the only thing that could break through his numbness. His glass slipped from his fingers. "Emma's visiting her aunt in the next county, but she returns tomorrow." She told him everything. Rafferty's ledger, the gold-toothed man, the timeline, the camp, the plan. The silence between them grew heavy, broken only by the rasp of Porter Dale's breathing. He wasn't a brave man, but now he wasn't just a sheriff. He was a father, and fathers do not let their daughters vanish into the dark. Dale listened as Magnolia laid it all bare, every ugly truth, every harrowing detail, and with each word, the blood drained from his face, replaced by a slow-burning fury. "I'll deputize every able-bodied man in town," he said, his voice gravel and iron. "No," Magnolia cut in, her tone calm but firm. "Too many men, too many mouths. Word will spread. Rafferty will catch wind and vanish like smoke. We need a few, but they must be men we trust beyond doubt." After a tense silence, they chose for Sheriff Dale himself, the blacksmith, whose younger sister had been stolen in the first wave, the hotel owner, whose daughter had just been named on the ledger, and, surprisingly, old Dr. Morrison, a retired military surgeon, whose hands remained steady as stone. Even with age. By dawn, Magnolia had crafted a plan, risky, desperate even. But unlike Rafferty's vile bargain, it offered something precious, a real chance to save every girl and make sure the monsters behind it all would never touch another soul. Thanks to Willa's courage, they knew the exact location of the coming operation. The gold-toothed man had carelessly revealed it in his arrogancy, and Rafferty planned to move the girls tomorrow night from the abandoned mining camp north of town. But first, Magnolia had to secure Willa's safety. She couldn't bear the thought of that girl, broken, brave, and carrying a life born of unspeakable cruelty, being caught in the storm of gunfire that was sure to come. She sent Willa away quietly, escorted by Dr. Morrison's wife to a safe place far from Copper Ridge. By late afternoon, Magnolia and the others lay hidden on a ridge overlooking the forgotten silver camp. The sun cast long, haunted shadows across splintered rooftops and hollowed-out cabins. Below, the operation had already begun. 3 wagons sat parked near the main building, guarded by hard-eyed men with rifles slung low. The gold-toothed man stood near the center, barking orders. The girls, 6 of them, were lined up in the dirt like cattle. Magnolia's breath caught in her throat. Emma Dale, barely more than a child, stumbled as rough hands shoved her forward. Patty, the hotel owner's daughter, tried to run. A guard's backhand sent her crumpling to the ground. Magnolia's finger curled around her rifle's trigger. "Steady," Dale whispered beside her, his eyes glued to his daughter. Magnolia nodded, jaw clenched. She had promised to wait for the right moment. The ambush would only work if it was clean and fast, and they needed more than victory, they needed that ledger. Willa had told her something invaluable. The gold-toothed man never left it behind. That small, black book held the names of every girl trafficked, every buyer, every town touched by their monstrous trade. Destroy it, and they'd burn down a network spanning half the frontier. The sun kissed the horizon in crimson light when Rafferty appeared. He strolled into camp, like a man surveying livestock, pausing occasionally to inspect a girl with a nod of cold approval. Magnolia watched him approach Emma, her blood pounding so loudly it almost drowned Dale's breath beside her. The sheriff trembled like a storm-hitched stallion, his knuckles white on his rifle. Then the gold-toothed man emerged from the main building, the ledger tucked under one arm like a sacred text. He spoke briefly with Rafferty, then pointed toward the road that led back to town. Magnolia froze. He was heading back to Copper Ridge to eliminate her and Willa before the wagons departed. If they didn't act now, everything would be lost. She fired first. The bullet struck the nearest guard in the throat, dropping him before he could shout. Dale's rifle roared next, felling a second man. The blacksmith and hotel owner charged down the slope, howling with fury, their boots pounding against shale and brush. Pandemonium erupted. Girls screamed and scattered toward cover as the traffickers scrambled for weapons. The air turned to fire and smoke, and Rafferty's shouts were lost beneath the gunfire. The gold-toothed man bolted for his horse, the ledger still clutched under his arm. Magnolia aimed carefully, exhaling slowly. She squeezed the trigger. The shot tore through his shoulder, spinning him with a cry of agony. The ledger flew from his grasp, landing in the dirt. Sheriff Dale reached the girls first, gathering them behind an overturned mining cart. "Stay down," he commanded, voice thundering with authority. No longer the hesitant figure from before he was a father, a lawman, and a man reborn. The firefight lasted only minutes, though it felt like a lifetime, when silence returned. 3 of Rafferty's men lay dead. 2 more dropped their weapons and raised trembling hands. The gold-toothed man sat in the dirt, clutching his wound, his eyes fixed on the ruined ledger as wind and bootprints scattered its pages. And Rafferty? He knelt in the bloodied dust, hands raised in surrender, his fine clothes shredded, his face smeared with sweat and filth. The architect of so much pain now looked small, pathetic, beaten. "You don't understand," he gasped. "This isn't just me. There are others, bigger than me, a whole system. You kill me, nothing changes." Magnolia stepped forward and bent to collect the scattered ledger pages, names, prices, locations. Horror etched in ink. "Maybe," she said softly, "but it'll change for you." Sheriff Dale approached, his badge catching the dying light. "Clyde Rafferty," he said grimly, "you're under arrest for kidnapping, human trafficking, and conspiracy against the people of this territory." The girls were shaken but alive. The ledger was intact. It was not the end of all things evil, but it was a beginning, a crack in the walls of a monstrous system. That night, while the prisoners were loaded into wagons headed for the territorial courthouse, Magnolia sat with Willa on the boarding house porch. The stars hung quiet above them, no longer indifferent. Willa's hand rested protectively over her belly, the faintest smile on her lips. "What will you name her?" Magnolia asked gently. "Hope," Willa replied without hesitation. "After everything, that's what we need most." Magnolia nodded, tears stinging her eyes. In a world where innocence had been taken and sold like livestock, the most defiant act was to create something better. Hope wasn't just a name, it was a promise. Clarice, Bonnie, and the others were still out there, but now they had names, places, clues. The ledger had given them a map, and Magnolia would follow it as far as it led. The fight wasn't over, not even close. That winter, Willa gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Little Hope grew up surrounded by women who had stared into darkness and chosen light. She would never know the horror that birthed her, only the love that fought to protect her. Sheriff Dale changed too, no longer content to sit behind a desk. He rode from town to town, chasing leads from the ledger, becoming known across the territory as the lawman who never stopped chasing missing girls. He no longer let silence speak louder than justice. Magnolia reopened the boarding house, but its purpose shifted. It became a haven for women fleeing abuse, a sanctuary where healing could begin and new lives could rise from the ashes of old ones. The story of Copper Ridge spread beyond the canyons and hills. Other towns took heart, other women found courage, and in those places where evil once thrived, resistance was born from whispers and grown into war cries. Clyde Rafferty died in territorial prison 3 years later. He never revealed the full scope of his network, never spoke another name. But the ledger had already cracked his empire, shutting down operations in 4 territories and rescuing dozens of women. The gold-toothed man lived longer, bitter and broken. A deal with prosecutors eventually pried loose enough information to save 17 more women, 2 of them among Magnolia's original girls. Justice came slowly, but it came thoroughly. And in Copper Ridge, children grew up hearing the story of the women who refused to surrender, women who stood tall in the face of monsters, women who fought for each other when no one else would. And they learned that sometimes the fiercest warriors aren't forged in armor or battle, but in love, in loyalty, and in the quiet, unstoppable courage of those who have lost everything and still choose to fight.